What happens in the silence after the last heartbeat? Does the soul dissolve into nothingness? Or does it embark on a journey through realms beyond the grasp of the living? Welcome, seeker of mysteries. Tonight, we open the veil to one of the most profound questions humanity has ever asked. What happens after death? Across cultures and centuries, sages, priests, and mystics have whispered that the soul does not simply vanish. Instead, it journeys through hidden worlds, facing trials, visions, and choices that determine its destiny. And while most of these teachings have been lost to time, one ancient text dares to map this passage in astonishing detail. A guide for the soul's journey after death. This is not merely a book. It is a cosmic travel manual. A scripture that attempts to describe the indescribable, to give the living a glimpse of the path the soul must walk once it leaves the body behind. But what secrets does it hold? Who wrote it? And for what purpose? And why, across civilizations, do we find echoes of the same journey, told in different symbols, different gods, but carrying the same eternal truth? Stay with me, for together we will walk through the corridors of the afterlife as described by this ancient text. And perhaps, in doing so, we may uncover not just what lies beyond death, but what it truly means to live. Long before modern science tried to define life and death in clinical terms, ancient civilizations gazed into the unknown and left behind sacred instructions, not for the body, but for the soul. Among these, one text stands out as a beacon across millennia, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But despite its modern title, it was never a single book, nor was it meant to be read by the living alone. The Egyptians called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day, a collection of spells, hymns, and incantations inscribed on papyrus scrolls, walls of tombs, and even the wrappings of mummies. Its purpose was profound: to serve as a guidebook for the dead, a manual that the soul would carry into the afterlife, navigating the perilous journey through the duat, the mysterious realm beyond death. Imagine a civilization where death was not the end, but a continuation of life on another plane. The pharaohs, priests, and scribes of Egypt believed that each soul would awaken after death in a strange, liminal world filled with trials, gates, and guardians. To pass safely, one needed more than courage. One needed knowledge, the right words, the right rituals, the right secrets. And so the Book of the Dead was born, a map of the invisible world, written by hands that believed they were recording divine truth. Its origins stretch back over 3,000 years, evolving from earlier texts such as the pyramid texts and coffin texts, carved into stone chambers deep within the pyramids. Over centuries, the words grew richer, more elaborate, until finally they became portable, rolled into papyrus scrolls, buried with nobles and commoners alike. Some scrolls stretched over 20 meters long, filled with colorful illustrations of gods, spirits, and the soul's perilous journey. But who wrote these words? Not a single author, but generations of Egyptian priests and scribes, each contributing to a tradition that blurred the line between religion and magic. They did not see these spells as mere poetry. To them, the words themselves were alive, carrying the power of creation, protection, and transformation. To speak them, or even to inscribe them, was to wield a key to the hidden architecture of reality. The Book of the Dead was not uniform. Each copy was unique, tailored to the individual who commissioned it. The wealthy could afford long scrolls with elaborate spells, The poor received simpler versions. Yet the purpose was always the same: to arm the soul with wisdom, to help it recognize friend from foe, illusion from truth, and ultimately to reach the judgment hall of Osiris, god of the underworld. Picture it: the soul standing before the scales of justice, where the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was heavy with sin, it was devoured by a monster, and the soul perished forever. But if it was light, the soul passed on to the eternal fields of paradise, where the dead lived in joy, free of hunger, free of pain. Thus, the Book of the Dead was more than funerary ritual. It was a cosmic passport, a manual of survival for the most important journey of all. It whispered a promise that death was not an end, but a passage, and those who carried its words would not walk alone in the darkness. The ancient texts tell us that death is not a sudden end, but a passage, a threshold where the visible and invisible meet. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes this moment with a mixture of awe and warning. It is the instant when the soul, known as the Ba, begins to separate from the body, leaving behind the vessel of flesh and bone that once housed it. Imagine this moment as the breaking of a thread. The body, heavy and still, belongs now to the earth. But the soul, luminous, weightless, hovers above, bewildered, searching for direction. The text tells us that the newly released spirit stands at the edge of the Duat, the great underworld. And like a newborn child entering the world, the soul finds itself in an unfamiliar landscape, vulnerable yet filled with possibility. The Egyptians believed this first stage, the dissolution, was both perilous and sacred. For here, the soul confronts the truth of impermanence. Everything it clung to, name, possessions, body, power, dissolves like sand in the wind. What remains is essence alone, stripped bare before eternity. This stripping away is not punishment, but preparation. The text assures the soul, you are not the body. You are the traveler. Remember this, and the way shall open. But with freedom comes danger. The newly separated soul is easily confused. Ancient writings describe how the spirit, still clinging to earthly desires, may try to return to its body, to the places it once loved, to the voices it once knew. Some spirits, the texts warn, linger in shadow, unable to release their attachments, becoming restless wanderers. To guard against this, the Book of the Dead places incantations in the hands of the departed, words of power that remind the soul of its true nature, guiding it away from despair and back onto the path of the Duat. As the soul drifts further from the body, it encounters the first light. This light is described as radiant and overwhelming, a brilliance that reveals the true nature of existence. To those prepared, it feels like a return home, the recognition of divine essence. But to the unprepared, the light can be blinding, terrifying, a force they retreat from in fear. The texts insist that this moment is a chance for liberation, to recognize the light as one's own spirit, to merge with eternity, and transcend the cycle of rebirth. Yet few are ready, and so for most, the journey continues deeper into the Duat. The first stage is complete. The soul has separated, the body has been left behind, and the choices made in this moment will echo through everything that follows. The dissolution is both a death and a birth, the end of one form and the awakening into another. It is the threshold where courage is tested, where fear must be set aside, and where the soul begins its greatest adventure. Once the soul has crossed the first threshold, leaving the body behind, it enters a vast and shifting realm described in the ancient texts, a world of visions, illusions, and tests. The Egyptians called it the Duat, while Tibetan mystics described it as the Chonyid Bardo, the realm of visions. Though the names differ, the essence is the same. Here, the soul faces the projections of its own mind. This is a place where thought becomes form, where emotion becomes landscape. Fear can summon terrifying guardians, while desire can create dazzling but deceptive paradises. The texts warn that every vision the soul encounters is both real and unreal, real in its intensity, but unreal in its substance, for all arise from the mind itself. Guides appear at this stage. Some take the form of radiant beings, gods, angels, or ancestral spirits. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the soul is met by deities such as Thoth, the scribe of the gods, who records the deeds of the departed, or by protective figures like Anubis, the jackal-headed guide of souls. These beings offer direction, urging the soul forward. Yet the texts caution: the guides can only help if they are recognized. To the unprepared, they may appear frightening, their divine radiance mistaken for threat instead of compassion. The same is true of darker visions. The soul may be confronted by monstrous figures, demons with burning eyes or deities of wrath. But the mystics explain, these are not external enemies. They are the shadows of the self. Anger, jealousy, fear, and violence, magnified and personified. Just as Carl Jung observed in modern psychology, the gods and demons encountered in this stage are projections of the unconscious, demanding acknowledgement. If the soul can see them as parts of its own mind, they dissolve. If not, they become chains that pull it deeper into confusion. The stakes here are immense. Liberation is possible at this stage, but so is entrapment. The texts insist that the soul must remember the truth, that all visions, whether peaceful or terrifying, are mirrors. To recognize them as illusions is to gain freedom. But to mistake them for absolute reality is to remain bound by them. Imagine standing in a dream where everything feels sharper, brighter, more intense than waking life. A benevolent deity offers you light. Do you embrace it or recoil in fear? A monstrous figure lunges at you. Do you flee or recognize it as your own shadow? Each choice shapes the journey. For most, the trial is overwhelming. The peaceful visions are clung to with attachment. The wrathful visions are rejected with terror. In both cases, the soul fails to recognize their true nature, and the opportunity for liberation slips away. The path forward becomes heavier, leading the soul into deeper layers of the afterlife. Thus, the second stage is not merely a passage. It is a test of awareness. Those who can pierce the illusion, who can face both gods and demons with clarity, walk free. Those who cannot remain bound to the cycle, carried onward by their own attachments. Here, the afterlife mirrors life itself. Our fears, desires, and illusions shape the world we experience. The question is the same in both realms. Will we see through them, or will we remain entrapped? Having crossed through visions of light and shadow, the soul now arrives at one of the most iconic moments described in the ancient texts, the Judgment Hall. In Egyptian tradition, this stage is known as the weighing of the heart, a trial that determines the soul's eternal fate. The scene is vivid and unforgettable. The soul stands before Osiris, lord of the underworld, who sits upon his throne, flanked by 42 divine judges. At his side is Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of wisdom, recording every word, every action, every outcome with impartial precision. Nearby waits Anubis, the jackal-headed guide, who places the heart of the deceased onto the great scales of truth. On the other side of the scale rests a single feather, the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, harmony, and cosmic order. The heart, seat of memory, conscience, and emotion, is weighed against the feather. The test is simple in description, but immense in consequence. A heart, lighter than the feather, may pass into the eternal paradise, known as the field of reeds. But a heart, heavy with lies, cruelty, and greed, is cast down into oblivion, devoured by the monster Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, the devourer of souls. This symbolic trial reflects something deeper than ritual. It represents the belief that every thought, every word, every action leaves an imprint, not only on the world, but on the soul itself. The heart carries these imprints as weight. A life lived in harmony with truth makes the heart light. A life lived in deception and selfishness burdens it. But the question arises, what really determines our fate after death? Is it a divine judge who condemns or saves us? Or is it the natural law of our own consciousness, weighing itself against truth? The texts suggest both. The scales are external, yes, but they also mirror an inner reality. The gods may oversee the trial, but the weight of the heart is created entirely by the choices of the individual. The trial, then, is not arbitrary judgment. It is the unveiling of what we already are. Other traditions echo this theme. In Tibetan Buddhism, the visions and trials of the bardos are shaped by karma, the energetic residue of our actions. In Christian mysticism, the soul also faces a form of judgment, where love and compassion outweigh selfishness and sin. Across cultures, the message is the same. What we carry within becomes our guide or our chain. For the Egyptians, the moment of judgment was not meant to instill fear, but to remind the living of a profound truth, that how we live shapes how we die. The weighing of the heart was both a future prophecy and a present teaching. To cultivate a light heart in life, free from hatred, greed, and dishonesty, was to prepare for freedom in death. And so the third stage presents the soul with its most sobering realization. No deception, no mask, no power can alter the scales. In the presence of eternal truth, the soul meets itself. And in that mirror, it discovers whether it is bound for liberation or for destruction. Having passed through death's doorway, having faced visions of light and shadow, and having stood in the judgment hall of truth, the soul now arrives at the final stage, the moment of destiny. Here the journey reaches its ultimate crossroads, rebirth or liberation. Ancient traditions describe this stage as a threshold where the soul hovers between worlds. In Egyptian belief, the purified soul, light as the feather of Ma'at, enters the field of reeds, a paradise mirroring earthly life, but perfected. Fields are always fertile, rivers always flowing, families reunited. It is a realm of eternal peace, where the soul can dwell in harmony, free from hunger, suffering, and toil. But not all souls find their rest so easily. For many, attachments remain, desires not fulfilled, fears not resolved, karma not yet balanced. In such cases, the soul is drawn back into the cycle of becoming, pulled toward another body, another lifetime. This idea is echoed not only in Egyptian texts, but across cultures. In Hinduism and Buddhism, it is known as samsara, the endless wheel of birth, death, and rebirth, driven by karma. The ancient Tibetan Bardo Thodol describes this final stage with haunting detail. The soul, caught in the turbulence of desire, sees visions of couples in union, symbols of the gateways into a new body. If clarity is lost, if attachment overpowers awareness, the soul is drawn irresistibly into rebirth, its new life shaped by the very tendencies and actions it carried from the last. A soul filled with fear may be reborn into hardship. A soul with compassion and wisdom may enter circumstances that allow its growth. In every case, karma becomes the architect of destiny. But liberation is always possible, even here at the threshold. The texts insist that if the soul can remain detached, lucid, and free from craving, it can refuse the pull of rebirth and merge instead into the eternal light, the divine essence from which all arises. In Buddhism, this is nirvana, the extinguishing of illusion, the end of suffering. In Egyptian thought, it is union with Osiris and the gods, dwelling in the eternal order of Ma'at. In mystical Christianity, it is reunion with God, the return of the spark to its source. The choice between rebirth and liberation is not arbitrary. It reflects the deepest truth of the soul. Every action in life, every thought, every intention becomes a seed. At death, those seeds blossom into destiny. The compassionate heart gravitates toward freedom. The burdened heart is drawn back into the lessons it still must learn. And so, the final stage is both a culmination and a beginning. For some, it is the end of the cycle, the soul dissolving into the ocean of divine peace, never to return. For others, it is but another turn of the wheel, another chapter in the long story of existence. The texts leave us with a profound reminder. What we choose today shapes the path we walk tomorrow, and even beyond tomorrow, into eternity. The final stage is written not at death, but in life itself. As we reach the final chapter of this journey, one truth becomes clear. The ancient texts were never only about death. They were guides for the living. The Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, and countless others were not meant to terrify us with visions of judgment or rebirth. Instead, they were maps, showing us how to live so that when death comes, our hearts are light, our minds are clear, and our souls are ready to walk freely. Think of the stages we've explored. The first threshold, where the soul separates from the body, reminds us that life itself is temporary, fragile, and precious. Every breath we take is a gift. To live with awareness is to be prepared for that moment of letting go. The trials and visions teach us something even more important, that the demons we fear are often born from within. Our anger, our attachments, our illusions, they shape the world we see, both in life and beyond. If we learn to face our shadows now, to meet our fears with courage and compassion, we are already preparing for freedom. The weighing of the heart asks us a question that echoes through time. How heavy is your heart? The ancients remind us that no wealth, no status, no power will follow us beyond the veil. What remains is the weight of our actions, the love we gave, the truth we upheld. A light heart is built not in the judgment hall, but in the choices we make every day. And finally, the stage of rebirth or liberation is a mirror of life itself. Each day, we are reborn. Each dawn is another chance to choose differently, to break free from the cycles of fear, resentment, or regret, and instead step closer to the freedom of living with clarity, kindness, and purpose. So what do these ancient texts tell us today? They remind us to live with awareness, to cultivate compassion for others and for ourselves, to recognize that every choice plants a seed that may bloom in this life or in the next. They remind us that death is not the end, but a teacher, urging us to live so fully that when the final threshold arrives, we cross it with peace instead of fear. Perhaps that is the greatest gift of these writings. They bring death closer, not as a shadow to fear, but as a mirror that makes life shine brighter. And so, as we close this journey, I leave you with a question. How are you living today? What seeds are you planting for the path ahead? If these reflections spoke to you, if the wisdom of the ancients has stirred something within, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's explore these mysteries together. And if you'd like to continue walking this path with me, discovering hidden knowledge and forgotten wisdom, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because this is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning.